There is a fascinating documentary or podcast series on Spotify that you can listen to for free, and it's entitled "Wind of Change." I believe that's the name of the podcast. And what the podcast is about is it explores the question of the song entitled "Wind of Change" by the band The Scorpions. Now, I didn't really know this song that well. I maybe had heard it like maybe a couple of times. It's like a power ballad. The Scorpions were a heavy metal band from Germany in the 80s. I remember them best for their song Rock You Like a Hurricane, which for me, the way that it was, this is neither here nor there, but the line always kind of drove me nuts. Here I am, rock you like a hurricane. I just thought, like, there's something. I know that these are people who don't speak English as a first language, but shouldn't it be here I am to rock you like a hurricane, or here I am gonna rock you like a hurricane. But there's something about, like, there's just some crucial bit that gets left out there, like these two disjointed sentences in these song lyrics that makes it sound more more like a song written by a foreigner, which it was. Anyhow, "Rock You Like a Hurricane," regardless of my critique of the lyrics, was a huge hit, and the Scorpions were a huge band. And what this documentary, or sorry, that's the second time I called it that. It's what this podcast explores is the question of whether the song "Wind of Change" was actually written by the CIA. And apparently the song "Wind of Change" by the Scorpions was huge in other places in the world. It was huge in Europe. It was huge in Russia. And the band even recorded the song in Russian with the Russian language. And the circumstances surrounding the writing of the song, or the alleged circumstances, the official story of how the song was written, is that they had just played a gig. They just played this show in Moscow, and it was this huge event. Like Rock for Peace or something like that. But it was ostensibly about, don't do drugs. The proceeds went to pay for drug rehabilitation, alcohol rehabilitation stuff. But of course, the bands were all, mostly a bunch of junkies who got drunk and high all the time. It was this lineup of famous heavy metal bands in the 80s, hair metal bands essentially, from Motley Crue to Skid Row to Bon Jovi, and a couple of others I can't think of right now, and also the Scorpions. The Scorpions were apparently the only non-American band to play this massive gig in Russia in the late 80s. I think it was in summer of 88 when things were starting to open up there. Those of us old enough to remember Gorbachev, Glasnost, Perestroika, all those kinds of things. So they played this show, and apparently after they played this show, the the singer of the Scorpions was so taken with this moment that things were changing in the Soviet Union, and that freedom was coming, that he wrote this song called "Wind of Change," and it's a song that begins with a whistling bit, which kind of reminds me of. I'm not a big hard rock. I'm not a headbanger kind of guy, but but I can make certain associations, and it makes me think of the song by Guns N' Roses called Patience, which also begins with the whistling part, or with the whistling of the melody before the actual start of the song. So the song was a huge hit, and it seems that the maker of this podcast knew somebody who had heard somebody else say that that Wind of Change was our thing. It was written by the CIA. He heard this from somebody within the CIA. But when this person who had heard it was asked if he could tell his story again for the podcast, he very quickly said, "Oh no, I can't talk about this. I will, I'll get arrested. There'll be felony charges against me," which is odd. Like, what's the felony? I don't know. Like exposing, would it be? Would they say it's treasonous or something? I don't know. It seems that whistleblowing, something that the CIA does when the CIA doesn't want you to do it, is a good way, to get arrested or maybe to have something worse happen to you. And indeed, this guy who he's talking to on the phone during this portion of the podcast, he gets very agitated, and we don't actually hear his voice, but we hear him on the other line, or we hear through the person who's talking to him on the other line how quickly he wants nothing to do with this. Now that's immediately suspicious, and it doesn't escape the notice of the person putting this podcast together. Now, over the course of the podcast, a lot of interesting things are exposed. We get to know, or we find out that the manager for a ton of these heavy metal bands, for the manager of all of these huge heavy metal bands in the 80s, had this very this very murky past, this very unsavory past. I think that's the more proper way to put it. He was a drug dealer, and not only that, but he was tight with Noriega when Noriega was still cool to for the U.S. when he was a U.S. ally, and then after something got twisted in U.S. foreign policy, as it often does, and Noriega was the bad guy, then they arrested him, of course, and people who were involved in Noriega's operation, all of the people who in D.C. who were down with Noriega, like President George H.W. Bush and the head of the CIA at that time, Casey, I think it was, and others, they suddenly changed their tune, and so all the people involved in the Noriega operation were arrested, and they threw the book at them, and they got years and years in prison, except for this guy who later became this music manager. He did not have to serve a single day in prison, but what he was told to do was to stage these concerts for peace, or for the anti-drug cause, and that was this concert in Moscow. So, connecting the dots there, the CIA is tight with these drug lords, and then they when things turn, and the CIA still, maybe maybe they. I mean, we know that the CIA sells drugs. I mean, don't bother me. Don't try to tell me otherwise. We know that they're a big that they play a huge role in the drug trade. We know that, amongst the many other nefarious things that they do. So they had the power to see to it that this guy, who had these connections in the rock and roll world, very high profile connections, they said, well, okay, we'll go easy on you as long as you do this for us. And what did he have them do for them? He had them put on this concert, which they were able to somehow coordinate because of what was happening in the Soviet Union at the time, with the Soviet Union being in this transition period and things being sort of chaotic there. Has them play this show in Russia, which is a huge moment of propaganda. It's like saying to all of these Soviet youth, who secretly are worshipful of rock and roll, in the West. It's part of what makes the West so cool. Here's a band. You get to see all your heroes. Oh, Ozzy Osbourne was another one of the performers at this heavy metal festival in Moscow. So I forgot about him. Of course, he's definitely worth mentioning. So they put on the show, and then afterwards, the story goes that the Scorpions guy is all like, "Wow, this is so cool. This is a moment of history. Things are opening up. The winds of freedom are blowing." And he writes this power ballad called "Wind of Change," and as the podcast guy mentions, Scorpions were not really a political band. They didn't write about political events. It was, here I am, rock you like a hurricane. This kind of heavy metal cliches was what they were into. Hair metal, But in this case, they decided to get really deep and really serious and write this song that had a huge effect on Soviet youth, just like the show did, and managed to promote the West. And of course the history of the CIA is replete with efforts to promote Western art or Western literature. The Paris Review was affiliated with the CIA. What's her name? Saunders' book about the CIA. So I think it's something I've talked about before here on this channel. So the CIA getting involved in promoting and perhaps even playing a significant role, perhaps even hiring someone to write a song, because there's a lot of anomalies involving this song. The song was written supposedly by the lead singer, but it was the guitarist who is generally the songwriter for the Scorpions. So there's all this stuff that's unusual. No smoking gun, but again, the story, the fact that it was heard by someone within the CIA who was then very reluctant to talk about it, or to wanted to disassociate himself from any kind of project that would investigate it. To me, that says a hell of a lot about the possible veracity of this story. Now, as this podcast goes along, what's both fascinating and annoying about it is it's by this guy who I guess is sort of a mainstream liberal, politically speaking, and so he's caught between these two these two worlds, because there was once a time when it was okay. In fact, it was approved of to point out the crimes of the CIA, to do so, and be on the left and be a Democrat and so forth, or maybe even more radical than a Democrat, whatever the case may be, to identify yourself with the left and also say, be a conspiracy theorist who says these are the things that the CIA is doing. But over the course of the podcast, we see that he's struggling because then now he's like, oh, but the Russians are promoting disinformation now and blah blah blah, and so it gets to be this, he starts to, you see that he's starting to get pulled in different directions, unfortunately, because he's not as independent of a thinker as one would hope for him to be. And so, it gets into this weird territory now where if you're on the left, at least if you're a neoliberal type, if you're a Democrat voter type, mostly, you have to dig the CIA, you have to dig the feds, you have to think that they're good, and that Russia is bad and Putin is bad and stuff like that. It's like the reverse of what things were during the Cold War, where it was the ultra conservative types who would say, no, never trust Russia, trust the CIA, trust our own institutions. America is the land of the free. Now the entire paradigm has turned upside down. But all of that aside, I think the question of whether this song might have been written by the CIA is a quite interesting question. And whether or not it was written by the CIA, it certainly was heavily promoted by front groups that were affiliated with the CIA. So I'd recommend listening to this podcast, again with the caveat that this guy is not as bold, not as much of a independent thinker as one would like him to be, and that gets more and more evident as the podcast goes on. But anyway, just some thoughts about it. Anybody else heard this rumor or this heard of this notion? Any of you metalheads out there, have you ever heard about this? Because I know I've got some metalheads who watch my channel, even though I'm very non-metal myself. But anyway, just some interesting thoughts. Let me know what y'all think if you have any thoughts. Thanks for watching.